If human history has taught us anything, it's that most of the time, you really don't want to be the man that replaces the man. When Manchester United crumbled in the wake of Sir Alex Ferguson's departure, there was the belief that this was the result of poor planning and succession. But there was also an acceptance that change of any kind after decades of familiarity would be painful, which is exactly why the prospect of a similar form of uncertainty was causing anxiety at the Emirates. 13th of May, 2018. For the first time in 22 years, Arsenal were faced with an unfamiliar prospect: life without Arsène Wenger. A man so intertwined with the football club, boys and girls grew up with the belief that the man and the institution were named after one another. 7 FA Cups, 3 Premier League trophies, with one of them being dipped in gold. The only manager to go an entire Premier League season without a single loss. Almost 2 decades later, the football was declining. The situation to some seemed unsalvageable. Into the vacuum stepped a man who, at this point, we all have to imagine had no idea what he had gotten himself into. Watching Shkodran Mustafi defend every week. That man was Unai Emery, a master tactician, one of the most successful managers in the history of European football. Unfortunately, what has since become painfully apparent is that during this entire period, Arsenal were a club that evidently did not know who or what they wanted to be, and in a cruel turn of events, it's plausible that it is because of all of this and because of Emery's less than ideal tenure and all the shifting that happened around it, that the club was able to truly understand what it actually desired. Long story short, Emery had to fail for Arteta to succeed. Short story long, the situation was a lot more nuanced than that. At the end of the day, hindsight is 2020, which is why today we're gonna look a little bit deeper. In honor of the Gunners, subscribe or I'm gonna have to use one of these on you.
Do you know how bad it is? Last night I chatted to my mum, yeah? My mum's Wenger in. Is she mad? Is she mad?
The decline in fortunes and mood in the final days of Arsène Wenger were truly a sight to behold. The civil war that broke out amongst the Arsenal support was almost biblical. As we've already seen, even family ties were being severed. In 1998, at the end of Arsène Wenger's second season with Arsenal, the Gunners lifted the Premier League trophy for the first time. When he joined Arsenal, the critics were having a field day in their mockery of disappointment. There were those that believed that foreign coaches did not have a place in English football. There were those that felt that his restriction on alcohol, cigarettes, and fixation on sports sciences to aid conditioning was too limiting on the players. He proved them all wrong. Fast forward to 2018, and after 21 years and 8 months in charge, the longest tenure of any manager to ever coach in the Premier League, his time was up. It was the end of an era, an end that was welcomed by many. You see, all it took was 78 points for Arsenal to clinch their first Premier League title. In his penultimate season, Arsenal earned 75 points, only 3 points apart, yet one of these points tallies was good enough for gold. The other left Arsenal in 5th. Tragically, this also ensured that for the first time since Arsène Wenger's first ever season with the club, Arsenal would not appear in the Champions League. The next year, the club would slip even further to 6th. If you were one for symbolism, perhaps you would be inclined to believe that this was an indication of how times had changed and how Arsène Wenger had simply not changed with them. But it's a little more complicated than that. Nowadays, there appears to be an acknowledgement of the circumstances that Arsène Wenger was working under as Arsenal coach, an acceptance that what he did for Arsenal was truly jaw-dropping. This of course includes the initial success that he achieved in the golden years at the club, as well as the masterclass in keeping them competitive while money was tight and perhaps the board weren't on his side. The construction of one of the most advanced stadiums on the planet being a main reason for the money part. But you see, at the time, sentiments weren't as sensible. Fans saw Arsenal cutting costs, taking loans, losing their negotiating power. Of course, Wenger made some mistakes along the way. In 17-18, his final season, the team managed only 4 away wins in the league, suffering 11 defeats. Until the last day of their campaign, Arsenal hadn't earned a single away point in the 2018 calendar year. Arsenal under Arsène Wenger were once the most feared team in England, with the scariest players in the game, blessed with the gift of physicality, speed, and skill. And then, all of a sudden, they all began to leave and were not replaced. While Arsenal drifted further and further down the ladder, ex-players rose higher and won trophies. Wenger restructured his tactics to implement a playstyle that relied on technical operators, passing football, bargain deals, and a fixation on youth that exceeded previous strategies. Thierry Henry has gone on record stating that it was Cesc Fabregas and his brilliance that convinced Wenger that he could bet the house on him taking the team forward and winning trophies.
The key for me is the one at the bottom, Cesc Fabregas. He changed the mentality of Arsène Wenger. We used to play a flat 4-4-2. And because of Cesc, the player that he was, he started to think that he had to build the team around Cesc Fabregas. So he went into a 4-3-3. And he still does play the same way.
Perhaps it was after witnessing him launch a slice of pepperoni pie at Sir Alex Ferguson after Man United ended the invincible streak. Fabregas, a La Masia product, took the team as far as he could, but ultimately returned to Barcelona at 24 years of age, only 3 years after becoming Arsenal's captain. Despite opening up the war chest towards the end of his time at Arsenal, purchases of Mesut Ozil and Alexis Sanchez are the most prominent examples, Arsenal never returned to the glory days. Wenger did win the FA Cup 3 times between 2014 and 2017, which, again, I think now people can correctly look back on and understand was a sensational achievement. But given the failure to adequately challenge for the league, and the fact that Arsenal dropped out of the Champions League at the round of 16 7 times in a row between 2011 and 2017, there weren't a lot of happy campers in the fan base. And whether you like it or not, this is something that we should all kind of be thankful for, in a way. Because it was off the backdrop of all of this that Arsenal Fan TV was born. Going live in 2012, Robbie Lyle and Arsenal Fan TV contributed tremendously to the rise of fan reactions, online football discourse, and football YouTube as a whole. Standing outside the Emirates on game day, getting the raw reactions of more often than not disgruntled fans. As soon as you saw a poor result for the Gunners, there was only one place you wanted to be. There were certain fans, certain players even, that believed that Arsenal Fan TV were making a mockery of the club, directly benefiting off of their misfortune.
What do you make of Arsenal Fan TV? And do any players watch it, or are you told not to watch it?
It does sometimes pop up in your timeline. I mean, I've seen it sometimes, or I have friends that they've been like, oh, have you heard that what that guy on Arsenal Fan TV? Like, I think it's so wrong for someone that claims to be a fan and their success is fed of a failure. So how can that be a fan?
Others felt that it was harmless and that they were doing nothing wrong, simply giving the fans a voice. And you might feel that mentioning Arsenal Fan TV in this video is irrelevant. I hear you. They are a fan channel and not associated with the club. Something that was made pretty clear when they were forced by the club to remove the word Arsenal from their name. But you have to understand, AFTV became somewhat of a representation of how the world viewed the modern Arsenal fan and how those same fans felt about their club. Of course, they did not and still do not represent the entire fan base, but they were and still are the loudest and biggest of said group. I only mention them to help explain the overall landscape that Arsenal was living within at the time, from the fans to the club and everything in between. Fans had a voice like never before, and this is not the last you will be hearing from them in this video. Going back to the actual club, it seems that Wenger was discontent for quite some time. Resources were scarce and Arsenal's ownership, Kroenke and his board, refused to put money into the club. Many of the lenders that Arsenal worked with to build the Emirates stipulated that Arsène Wenger must remain the manager for a period, knowing it was their best shot at getting their money back. Wenger also once stated that one of his biggest regrets was not leaving Arsenal as early as 2007 when friend and former executive David Dein left. It seems as though there was a time at one point where Wenger turned around one day and all of a sudden he didn't quite have the support that he once did in the boardroom, but he still did not leave. And there was a reason for that.
I felt always you cannot ask for the players to be loyal if you jump out at the first offer. I worked always and I stayed for a long time without the resources because it is in my character. I was happy to work for something that was bigger than me. And I felt that if I could leave a legacy to build the training ground, build the stadium, have a fantastic academy, the guys who come after me can work in decent conditions. When I left, the money situation was clear and positive.
When we built the stadium, we had 5 to 7 difficult financial years where we had to pay the money back. We had to be 3 years in the Champions League out of 5. We had to sell our best players every year to survive. But we didn't do 3 years out of 5 in the Champions League. We did 5 out of 5. End quote. On top of that, there came another problem. Arsène Wenger was a manager at Arsenal, not a coach. He had his hands in everything from recruitment to budgeting to man management to scheduling. But the football world was moving in a different direction. Him, Sir Alex Ferguson, David Moyes at Everton, these are notable examples of guys that did this at a high level in the Barclays era. However, increasingly, the executive organogram of high-level clubs grew to include sporting directors, technical directors, and other various titles. These are people specifically there to take on most of the traditional manager's responsibilities, leaving the modern quote-unquote manager with the title of head coach and a focus on football only. Arsenal wanted to get with the program. Arsène Wenger was very opposed to this. His line of thought was simple. He spent the last decades being blamed for everything that went wrong at the club. He was able to live with this, as many of the decisions were ultimately his, from a footballing perspective, at least. Now, he was faced with the prospect of being blamed for countless decisions he did not make, something he could not accept. Quote, "I'm the manager of Arsenal Football Club, and as long as I'm the manager of Arsenal Football Club, I will decide what happens on the technical front. That's it." End quote. As you can imagine, Arsène Wenger and Arsenal CEO Ivan Gazidis clashed frequently. By late 2017, Arsenal were already building elements of a post-Wenger framework behind the scenes. The appointments of figures such as Raul Sanllehi as head of football relations and Sven Mislintat as head of recruitment reflected a wider plan to set up the new era at the Emirates. At the end of the day, Wenger's departure was known to be a long time coming, be it because of the club's desire or something else. The man was 68 years old, and at the very least probably needed some time away. When it was Wenger's time to actually leave, the atmosphere was emotional. Many were hit with the realization that what they had been campaigning for so long was coming to reality. For the longest time, Wenger's hand was imprinted on everything at the Emirates. He wore every hat, operated at a level that few of us could even begin to imagine. Now, it was time to see if he was the problem after all.
Just would like to finish by one simple word. I will miss you.
The new-look Arsenal was in need of a strong figure to lead the line. Ivan Gazidis and the board's search for such a man led them to Paris. Unai Emery's own playing career was modest. The Spaniard was a product of Real Sociedad's youth academy, but was never really good enough to break through to the senior team. He spent his career mostly in Spain's lower divisions until he retired aged 32. Retirement was forced upon him thanks to a knee injury sustained while playing for third division side Lorca Deportiva. Evidently, his employers weren't quite ready to let him go and decided to offer him the role of the vacant head coach position. Emery thought, why not? Took the job, guided them to promotion in his first year, and finished in 6th place in his second year. People talked, and before long, Emery had switched colors and began managing Almeria. He worked his magic once again and took the second division side to La Liga. In his first year as a senior coach, Emery was distinguished as the best in class in his division and awarded the inaugural Coach of the Year trophy, repeating the feat a year later. So, you won't be surprised to hear that he led Almeria to an 8th place finish in La Liga. Valencia was next. It was a pretty big leap going from the 17,000-seater capacity of Almeria's home ground to Valencia's 50,000-seater Mestalla Stadium. In 2004, the same year that Unai Emery retired from a relatively unremarkable playing career, of course as a relative nobody, Valencia was crowned as the best team in all of Spain. 4 years later, the man was their manager and somebody that all the opposition were growing very wary of. Valencia were reigning Copa del Rey holders when Emery joined. However, on a league front, Valencia had slipped from the heights they once reached, finishing 10th the year before the new man arrived, below Almeria, in fact. Emery was put in place to at least return them to the Champions League, and again, this mission was successful. Armed with David Villa, Juan Mata, David Silva, Eva Banega, among others, in Emery's 4 years in Valencia, he achieved a 6th place finish and then 3 third place finishes. All 3 were back-to-back-to-back between 2010 and 2012. He was able to accomplish all of this by being unrelenting in his focus on the finer details, obsessive video work, role-specific coaching, and repeating scenarios until players could execute them almost automatically. Notably, responsibilities were spread across the squad rather than built around a single superstar. Now the picture, it wasn't so clear back then as he was only really getting started, but this is the setup where Emery seems to always thrive, overperforming expectations with non-super teams filled with non-superstar players, supported by fans that understand their team's restrictions, which is where a large issue lay. Valencia were a big team with lofty ambitions. Remember, not too long ago, they were top of the pile, and the season before Emery joined, they were National Cup champions. But that's not to say they were unrealistic. Nobody would really expect any team not named Real Madrid or Barcelona to finish above 3rd place in any given La Liga season, especially in this era, 2010, 2011, 2012. Look at who was above them in all 3 of those 3rd place finishes. Also, these were years in which Jose Mourinho, Pep Guardiola, Cristiano Ronaldo, Lionel Messi, and everyone in between were terrorizing the continent, all while Valencia were unable to retain all of Silva, Villa, Mata, and more. 25, 21, and 30. Those were the point gaps between Valencia and whichever of the 2 apex predators finished in 2nd. In 2012, Valencia scored 61 points. 19th place Sporting Gijón scored 37. In other words, the difference between 2nd place and 3rd place in Emery's final year as Valencia manager was bigger than the difference between 3rd and 19th. The fans and the board wanted the team to attempt to close the gap, and believed that Emery was not doing enough to achieve this. Sid Lowe of The Guardian described this very well, only weeks before Emery would eventually leave Valencia. Quote, "Valencia have hit a glass ceiling, and maybe even a glass floor too. Motivation has become problematic. The huge differences in resources between Valencia and the big 2 not only explains their failure to compete, it also excuses it, becoming something to hide behind." End quote. From then on, Emery moved on to Spartak Moscow in 2012, a stint that most have forgotten, for good reason. It only lasted 4 months. This was the biggest failure of his career thus far. It was also the first time he had left Spain in an attempt to broaden his horizons. And so, for the first time, he returned to his native land to rebuild his reputation and career. It would not be the last time. This time his destination was Sevilla, joining only 2 months after being axed from Moscow, and rebuild his career. He did. This was probably the best decision that he made throughout his entire career. Again, Unai Emery was in that sweet spot of big, respected football club, but not big enough or expected to be the outright alpha in the country. Sevilla did not challenge for the league title, but they didn't need to make this the most successful 4-year period in the club's history, and quite frankly, one of the most miraculous stories in recent European football history. In his first year, joining the team in January 2013, he was able to steer the team to 9th place, but because Malaga and Rayo Vallecano, who both finished above Sevilla, were embroiled in some financial irregularities with UEFA, their spots in the Europa League went to Sevilla and Real Betis. This was the first miracle. The second was when a Sevilla side that did not even qualify for the competition won the whole thing. And because the first time felt so nice, he did it again the very next year. The year after that, 15-16, was the first season that the Europa League winner of the previous year gained automatic entry into the Champions League. But Unai Emery, he is, I guess he's a creature of habit, because Sevilla were knocked out of the Champions League at the group stage, returned to Europa, and won it all again. Europa merchant. By the time Emery was done with them, Sevilla was the most successful club in the history of the competition. Of course, people took notice. Since the Qatari takeover in 2011, PSG's domination of France had seen them win every league title from 2013 through 2016. League domination was no longer their main interest, hence the interest in Unai Emery. They were adamant that given the unlimited resources of the Qatari owners, Unai Emery could translate his Europa League success into Champions League glory. It did not exactly work out as hoped. In his first season, PSG were eliminated from the Champions League by Barcelona in, arguably, the most embarrassing collapse in recent Champions League memory. Winners by 4-0 in the first leg, losers by 6-1 in the second. The famous remontada. A victory sealed by probably Neymar's greatest performance in his entire career, 2 goals and an assist. On top of that, Kylian Mbappe decided to introduce himself to the football world by winning Ligue 1 with Monaco. PSG did not like any of that, so they bought both Neymar and Kylian Mbappe. It's just business. With this kind of firepower, nobody was causing any upsets in the league the next year, his first and only league title at the time of recording this. However, the Champions League was still some distance away from them. Round of 16 exits again. If you recall, Emery was brought in to win the Champions League, so this tenure constituted as somewhat of a failure. And I'm guessing that if you've been paying attention, you've probably already guessed why things fell apart. PSG were protagonists. The expectation is that they need to win everything. If not, they may as well win nothing. A side effect of this is, of course, player power. Superstar player power. Reports indicated that senior players like Thiago Motta, Blaise Matuidi, Thiago Silva, Maxwell, and Javier Pastore insisted that Emery abandon his preferred system for that of their previous coach. Players were apparently ignoring Emery's game plans during the famous remontada, which makes sense, I guess. So of course, it's only natural that they paid 222 million euros for the man of the match from the remontada just so he could refuse to follow his instructions too. Quote, "I know when I am the principal person in the group and when I am not. At PSG, the leader is Neymar. At Manchester City, it's Pep Guardiola. My priority was to make Neymar happy. It didn't matter how." These were the words of Unai Emery a couple of weeks before his time with the club was up. And yes, you heard that right, he was still PSG manager when he said this. At penalty time, scenes such as Neymar refusing to give the ball to Edinson Cavani, PSG's designated penalty taker, were simply inevitable. At the end of the 17-18 season, he had taken his services elsewhere, which leads us all the way back to North London.
Okay, good morning. Or good afternoon. Hi, I am Unai Emery.
Unai Emery was not the outright favorite for the job when the search began. As a matter of fact, according to Betfair's odds on the 18th of May 2018, he wasn't even top 3. According to them, Emery had the same odds as Carlo Ancelotti, who had been sacked by Bayern Munich a couple months prior. The favorite was fellow Spaniard and former Arsenal player Mikel Arteta. Arteta had played his final game as a professional footballer as an Arsenal player and had spent the next 2 years as Pep Guardiola's assistant at Manchester City, winning the Premier League in the process. Reports indicate that he got as far as discussing his backroom staff at Arsenal and working out the finer details of a potential contract. Sadly, it was not meant to be. It just wasn't his time yet. He did not have any experience as a head coach, and ultimately, that is part of what made the difference. This was not the case with Unai Emery. Quite importantly, Emery was comfortable with working within a modern football organogram, sporting director and all. He had done so at both Sevilla and PSG, and also, quite significantly, at this point in time, this specific point in time, Arsenal were also in that neighborhood, that sweet spot I keep referring to. A big club, not expected to win the league immediately as they were in transition, but still ambitious enough and talented enough to do something productive. Emery was inheriting a talented squad. I mean, they weren't great as a unit, but the squad was more than functional. Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang, Alexander Lacazette, Mesut Ozil, Granit Xhaka. Mesut Ozil in particular had only 6 months prior signed a contract extension which made him the highest paid player in Arsenal's history. reportedly £350,000 a week. He was undoubtedly Arsenal's star player at the time, and the sentiment around this renewal was positive at the announcement. Alexander Lacazette and Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang were in their prime years as attackers, proven goal scorers capable of playing together. Defense was where the bulk of the problems lay. Constant mistakes by Shkodran Mustafi and an aging Laurent Koscielny, coupled with Sead Kolasinac, who never truly impressed. Petr Cech was also getting up there in age. Arsenal's response was to buy Bernd Leno, centre-back Socrates, and CDM Lucas Torreira to help address the issue. And after the first 2 games of the year, many were left unhappy. A baptism of fire saw Arsenal play Manchester City, the reigning champions, and then Chelsea, the winners of the year before that, back-to-back. As you've probably already guessed, both games were lost. But after that, Arsenal began to really click into gear, and it was looking like this post-Wenger era wasn't going to be too bad after all. What followed was 7 wins in a row and a 22-game unbeaten streak. Aubameyang and Lacazette were scoring freely, and even when the hot streak came to an end, Arsenal was still getting results. Players were pressing hard, they were fighting when going down. Many of the positives were attributed to Emery's tactical flexibility. Often his in-game formation adjustments were praised, and he wasn't afraid of making early substitutions if matches weren't going according to plan. Like I said, people were impressed by this at first, but the praise of that very attribute would turn sour very soon. Right around Christmas time is when the mood around the Emirates began to get a little bit darker. First, just before Christmas, Arsenal were knocked out of the League Cup by Champions League finalists Tottenham Hotspur. A 0-2 defeat at home, a Dele Alli and Heung-min Son special. 10 days later, in the last game of 2018, Arsenal made a trip to Anfield and proceeded to get clapped up by the soon-to-be Champions League winners. Bobby Firmino was dancing around the so-called defense and scored a hat-trick in a 5-1 defeat. 1 month later, Jesse Lingard was moonwalking at the Emirates as Manchester United dumped Arsenal out of the FA Cup. Now, all of these were embarrassing moments, but all was not lost. Like I said, Arsenal was still getting important results. In early April, Arsenal were 3rd in the league and through to the Europa League semi-finals. Considering that Champions League football, regardless of how it was achieved, would have equated to a successful season, he was on track to having a good start to life in North London. The football gods, they do enjoy comedy though. His in-game tinkering was quickly relabeled as a liability and a lack of planning. He was labeled as overly pragmatic as Arsenal managed only 2 wins in their last 7 games in the league. 5th place finish, only a single point from the top 4, 2 points from top 3. Consequently, the Europa League final became arguably Arsenal's most important game in well over a decade. Not only would this match decide the difference between strong or a poor season, but Arsenal had not won major European silverware since winning the now defunct Cup Winners' Cup in 1994. Honestly, if all of this was scripted, you could hardly write a better setup. A season derailed by inconsistency, suddenly given a lifeline in the form of a competition in which the new manager is the most successful in its history. And their opponents were a pretty unstable Chelsea side managed by Mauricio Sarri, a man who, in 29 years as a football coach, had never won a major trophy. What could go wrong?
Giroud got his hand to it! Pedro! Yeah! Back to Eden Hazard! Name on the trophy!
Yeah, so it couldn't really have gone that much worse. Chelsea, 4. Arsenal, 1. Arsenal were forced to watch on as Chelsea, who had already qualified for the Champions League with their 3rd place finish, snatched all hope away from them. Ainsley Maitland-Niles had as bad a game as Eden Hazard had a good one, and Hazard scored 2 goals, one of them being a penalty that Maitland-Niles gave away. Mesut Ozil, so heavily believed in before, had not had the best season to begin with, but here, he was seen walking around on the pitch all game. Notably, when already 4-1 down in the 77th minute, he gets subbed off and takes a leisurely stroll to the touchline. Questions on his overall commitment had already begun to fester and would soon reach a tipping point. Arsenal were not helped by the fact that both Aaron Ramsey someone who tends to show up in finals, and Henrik Mkhitaryan were not present. In Mkhitaryan's case, due to tensions between Armenia, his home country, and Azerbaijan, the host country of the final, he was advised to not travel. In solidarity, I guess, the remainder of the Arsenal squad chose to not show up on the night either. In this moment, Arsenal were depleted. Spirits were low, confidence was non-existent, people were angry. 2.5 million views. Damn, nobody did it like these guys, man. All eyes were on Unai Emery. Technically, his inaugural season was better than Wenger's final one from a points perspective. They were within touching distance of Champions League, but contextually, everything was off. Unfortunately, there was no coming back from this moment. In the new year, Arsenal failed to ever really get going. The defense was a shambles, the general play was uninspiring. In Arsenal's first 13 games of the 1920 season, they only won 4 times. This left them sitting in 8th place, on the brink of slipping further. The writing was on the wall. As we've already indicated, the situation never really improved following the late collapse of Emery's first season. But by this point, the fragile nature of several relationships within the club began to unravel for the world to see. We'll start with the players. The dressing room dynamic, already fractured, took a turn for the worse. Arsenal under Emery worked somewhat on a leadership group system as opposed to a sole captaincy. Members of this group in his first year were outright captain Laurent Koscielny and vice-captains Petr Cech, Aaron Ramsey, Granit Xhaka, and Mesut Ozil. Cue the start of the second year. Laurent Koscielny, unhappy with how Emery had been handling his playtime following injuries, and also someone who had been pretty loyal to Arsenal throughout his entire career there, had never really done anything against the club, refused to join Arsenal's pre-season tour in a bid to force a move away. He later announced he was leaving Arsenal by ripping off his shirt and revealing a Bordeaux shirt underneath. This was not taken well. Aaron Ramsey, a fan favorite, left for free. Petr Cech retired and then became a pro ice hockey player. Fair play to him, the man's a true athlete. Granit Xhaka was appointed as the new captain following a squad vote in late September 2019. Only 1 month later, Arsenal played Crystal Palace at home and took a 2-0 lead within 9 minutes. Things were looking good. After that, the team collapsed and Palace were level by the 52nd minute. Xhaka did not have his best game and was replaced by Bukayo Saka in the 61st minute, a substitution that led to applause by the Arsenal crowd. Xhaka, clearly feeling disrespected, sarcastically began gesturing to the crowd, cupping his ears, mouthing the words "F*** off," going straight down the tunnel and removing his shirt. He was stripped of the captaincy within the week. To be entirely fair to him, his reasoning for this was that the abuse he was getting from Arsenal supporters in the weeks leading up to this game was unrelenting. Comments wishing harm on his wife, threatening to break his legs, wishing that his daughter grew ill. The frustration boiled over in this moment. Mesut Ozil, on the other hand, did not have one striking moment. His stock and performance had been steeply on the decline ever since he signed that mega contract with Wenger still in the hot seat. At some point, pretty early in his first year, Emery simply decided Ozil was not fit for the vision of the team he had in mind. His appearances dropped, his form dropped, he had injuries, some were even starting to believe he was never injured at all, but simply faking it because he couldn't be asked to lace up.
Well, we don't know, do we, whether he's really injured or not? He's just that.
Why do you doubt it?
To miss that amount of games is quite remarkable, isn't it? To 100 matches in that period. So I would say that is definitely questionable. We don't know. Only the player really knows. I think the manager is basically saying, look, you can't just turn up and train when you want it, when you fancy it. I'm not going to take you.
For me, he is like another player. It's one decision when one player is coming or not coming. Sometimes he is helping us. At other moments, he is not helping us because of his injuries or because maybe the match is not for him. But he is a good player. End quote. Words of Unai Emery. As you've probably already guessed, the Arsenal support was split. On one hand, imagine being a supporter and watching your manager give up on your club's highest paid player and also the most creative player your club has had in at least a decade, while playing 3 CDMs in Xhaka, Guendouzi, and Lucas Torreira every game. On the other hand, there were those that felt that Ozil was clearly past it and that perhaps the big contract was a mistake. Which brings us to a truly baffling detail regarding this entire situation. The three individuals who perhaps had the most influence in brandishing Ozil with his blockbuster contract were all gone by late 2019. Former CEO Ivan Gazidis, former head of recruitment Sven Mislintat, former manager Arsène Wenger. And not only that, but the former two on that list were largely responsible for hiring Unai Emery in the first place. By the end of his first year, the club was ran by people who clearly were not invested in whatever plan was put in place when Emery was appointed, let alone his long-term success. Meanwhile, Emery was left to field question after question regarding the status of a player taking up valuable wage bandwidth, as if he had anything to do with the decision. The incoming and remaining public-facing executives Raul Sanllehi, Edu Gaspar and Vinay Venkatesham did not exactly hit the ground running. Probably the highest profile showcasing of this was the Nicolas Pepe situation. Emery wanted a left-sided, right-footed winger with Premier League experience before his second season began. All reports indicated that Crystal Palace's Wilfried Zaha was the top preference and that Emery had gone as far as personally contacting him. Both Emery and the player were ready to work with each other. Instead, Emery was given Nicolas Pepe, a right-sided, left-footed winger from Ligue 1 with no Premier League experience for £72 million. For years, Arsenal fans were critical of the board for not spending to be competitive, only for the club to finally open their wallet by breaking their transfer record on a player that the coach did not even want. Pepe was very clearly talented but never settled at Arsenal. Another big problem for Emery was, of course, the language issue. This being Emery's first job in England, he was determined to communicate in English first and foremost, something that just about every recounting of his time with Arsenal praises. The issue, it seems, was that his grasp on the English language was not the strongest yet, and he was the type of person that valued direct communication. So even though he had a translator, sometimes he preferred to not use them when communicating with his players, staff, and the media. If you have any knowledge of Emery's first foray into English football, you will probably be familiar with the "good evening" meme.
Good evening, good evening, good evening, good evening.
Realistically, it's only natural to note how he sounds different to how a native speaker would pronounce some words, but English is his fourth language. It's also highly likely that the majority of those that made fun of how he sounded would struggle with even the most basic Spanish words. Still, there is a lot to be said about the level of communication he was able to convey and how that affected things off the pitch, on the pitch, and behind the scenes. Quote, "Sometimes when I don't understand when the coach is trying to communicate with me, I have a better communication with Freddie Ljungberg. He speaks better English." End quote. The words of a 17-year-old Bukayo Saka in 2018. It has been widely reported that he is a very descriptive speaker and tends to over-explain at times. Couple that with his fixation on details, and it's not hard to see how things that Emery said were lost in translation. To make matters worse, many sources indicate that the mocking of his accent was not only coming from onlookers, but players too. The dressing room was gone. And on the 29th of November 2019, after a defeat to Eintracht Frankfurt in the Europa League, Emery was gone. Ultimately, the real tragedy of Unai Emery's time at Arsenal is that you could say he was a bad appointment, sure, but there was so much chaos going on in upper management that I doubt Arsenal truly knew what they wanted themselves. Recall that a strong part of Emery's appeal was his apparent willingness to be a head coach, and only a head coach. Emery has always been described as obsessive over the football. He would stay at Arsenal's Colney training ground from 7 AM to 10 PM, designing new training sessions, watching past matches, working on the finer details. When you hear things like this, for the most part, it seems that Arsenal got what they initially sought out for. However, there are still certain aspects that a coach needs to have influence over to succeed at that level. And there are conflicting reports on the level of autonomy and influence that Emery wanted to have. Some say he was not interested in being overly involved in talent identification and transfer negotiations, day-to-day running of the club, or addressing player and agent grievances, as Wenger had once done. That Emery was scarcely concerned with the diplomatic side of the job, such as getting to know the Arsenal staff at all levels, even if it falls out of his job description. Others say he craved more control and was simply unhappy he was not able to bring more of his own staff in to enforce that. This disappointment in the level of control, or rather lack thereof, is a notion that is somewhat backed up by the Zaha situation, for example. Now this is framed as a major nail in the coffin of Emery's Arsenal career, having reportedly reached out to the player thinking the deal was going to go through, only to realize how little influence he actually had. There are probably pieces of truth in both schools of thought, but whoever you choose to believe, or whichever side of the fence you choose to see as more accurate, is just a matter of opinion. What's obvious is that there was a disconnect between communicated expectations and reality. In reality, from the outside looking in, it seems that what Arsenal truly wanted was not purely a head coach to begin with. They wanted someone in between Emery and Wenger, a head coach willing to connect with every aspect of the club, that understands their role in the organization, communicates on everyone's level, is able to manage the expectations of those below and above them, and is likewise willing to go above and beyond the job description. Eventually, that is what they got. For the second time, Emery went back to Spain to rebuild his reputation. This time, it was with Villarreal, and immediately, he won another Europa League title. He then established a more firm grip on the English language, returned to the country with Aston Villa, and has overseen a dramatic turnaround in fortunes. Wait a minute. Aston Villa? Sevilla? Villarreal? Coincidence? Yeah, coincidence. What is not a coincidence is that all of these are three big historic clubs with sizable loyal fan bases, all of which have ambitions to be amongst the best on the continent, but are not realistically of the opinion that they are amongst the true elite. They are bound to be underdogs in those circles, but are more than capable of being the best of the rest, so to speak. At Aston Villa, much has been made of Emery's success being down to the fact that Villa allowed him to bring in his own personnel to take on all aspects that he disdains. Reportedly, one of the first calls Emery made before joining Villa was to Damien Videgani, a former colleague of his from Valencia. His mandate was as Emery's personal assistant at first, managing transfer negotiations, agent quarrels, and everything around and in between off the field. Videgani was soon promoted to the role of Director of Football Operations of Aston Villa, and Emery now had an executive that knew him deeply and allowed him to flourish. As for Arsenal, Mikel Arteta was confirmed as coach less than a month after Emery's departure. The initial years under Arteta did not make for pleasant sailing. In fact, results were worse than under Emery for 2 years, back-to-back 8th place finishes. But that didn't actually matter. Like I said, I'm not sure Arsenal were aware of what they actually wanted beforehand. With Arteta, everything became clear. The greatest testament to that is the fact that 7 years on from his appointment as Arsenal head coach, Mikel Arteta's position has never truly been in danger. In fact, 1 year after his appointment, his job title was officially changed to First Team Manager. Remember, none of this is to say one style is objectively better than the other regarding these two Spaniards. Evidently, their styles are just better suited to different environments. At the end of the day, Unai Emery was simply the wrong man at the wrong place at the wrong time. And there we have it. If you enjoy these and want to see them before they get put on YouTube, you can support the channel by going over to Patreon. It goes a long way to help support the editing and research costs. That's all for me today. Hope you guys enjoyed. Hope you're having a great day. Cheers, and I will catch you in the next one.